Historic cases of racial harassment at the Coast Guard Academy. We talked to the Academy's superintendent about a recent Homeland Security report. The Dreamers making the grade at Eastern Connecticut State University. But does the recent Dakar court ruling change anything? Plus, a look at some of the top stories from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. A recent Homeland Security report by the Office of the Inspector General found 16 allegations of racial harassment between 2013 and 2018 involving cadets at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy based in New London. The report says the Academy was aware of the allegations but failed to investigate and take corrective action in many of the cases. In early 2019, Rear Admiral Bill Kelly took over as the new superintendent of the Academy. And I sat down with him recently to talk about the report and what it means to him as the officer in charge and what it means for the Coast Guard.
Rear Admiral, thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
So what I want to get to really with you is how do you move on from this? Because there's a lot of good stuff that you do. This puts a lot on all the rest of the stuff that you do.
Appreciate that question because I've received that question a couple other times, and I think the opportunity is upon us. Over the past several weeks, we've seen several killings take place right in front of our eyes, and we've seen the national call for justice, call for racial justice across our country. So some have said that this report couldn't have come at a worse time with the challenges that we face as a nation coming to grips with our history. But I would say it comes at the perfect time. And what I mean by that is if the report was going to come out and it came out 2 months from now or it came out 2 months back, there may not have been that much of awareness. I think we're sensitive to it right now. I think our heightened awareness to it, and it gives me a venue to then go and talk with my community, but not only talk, act with my community and gain their attention. Because believe it or not everybody is buying in on this. There are many folks that are hoping we can move on from this report or that report. They're hoping we can move on from the deaths of Mr. Floyd or Mr. Brooks and what I would and countless others. What I would say is we cannot move on. We have to move forward, and moving forward means you're taking action, not just grieving over the loss of someone, but you're actually taking action in their memory and taking action in the memory of the cadets that were impacted by the investigation that you have.
A couple of the things that were highlighted by Homeland Security, which again the Coast Guard Academy has accepted, is the misconduct process and also the anti-harassment process. Talk us through those a little bit as to how they've been amended, because there has been amendments to those. But of course, people are going to want to know you're still effectively going to police yourself. You're still going to be doing these investigations as and when they come up. People are going to want to know, how can we trust you this time to make sure it's done correctly? Because that was the crux of the review, that they were not done to the standards that the Coast Guard Academy expected, that certain personnel were not brought in, certain information wasn't actually divulged. Give us a sense of how that is going to change.
Sure. So important to put it in context. So that the audit was done by the IG at the Department of Homeland Security, and it covered 16 cases between 2013 and 2018. And in those 16 cases, they found 11 cases where there were some issues, and the issues basically boiled down into three different buckets. One, there was no accountability or what was perceived as lack of accountability. There was questions with regards to how the investigation was conducted, and then there was questions with regards to, not questions, but there was a lack of proper connection with the Civil Rights Service Provider's office in this area of the country. So that would be the Coast Guard Civil Rights Service Provider. So with 11 of those cases, they were looked at. So 2013 and 2018. Several things have changed already since then, but the Writing the Ship report, which came out in December of 2019, right? So it came out at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, which seems, again, like decades ago almost, highlighted some of the same issues that the IG identified here. And so with regards to accountability specifically, if I choose to take accountability or hold someone accountable for their actions, I have to report that up the chain. And if I choose not to hold someone accountable, I now have to report that up the chain. The Coast Guard has also identified, kind of going back to policing yourself, did we do the right things in preparing folks to do investigations in these sensitive areas? We're very good at doing investigations on vessel mishaps, aviation mishaps when they occur. We know how to do those things. This is a whole nother area that's nuanced. It deals with people, it deals with emotions, it deals with feelings, it deals with real hurt and real pain. And so we have to do a better job of that, and the Coast Guard's recognized that. And this is not about the Coast Guard Academy. This is about the Coast Guard. We are one component within the larger Coast Guard. And so these two reports have focused the Coast Guard's attention on these areas. And with regards to the Civil Rights Service Provider, I can tell you I'm in with him. If not quarterly, definitely. If not monthly, then definitely quarterly. And we have a complete spreadsheet, and we go through every single case. Both myself and the service provider do that, and myself and my staff judge advocate, my lawyer, we will do the same thing. So each and every case is being tracked, so nothing falls through the cracks or nothing falls off the table.
As we said at the top of this interview, you became the superintendent of the United States Coast Guard Academy in, I believe, early 2019. Right. How much damage do you think this has done to the basically the public-facing image of the Academy and the Coast Guard?
Yeah, I don't know, right? Because you're so involved in the day-to-day efforts of the Academy. But you pick your head up and look around, and whether it's on social media, whether it's engagements with parents, faculty, friends of the Coast Guard, alumni, very positive things are brought up. I had a very nice conversation yesterday as the cadets were coming back in. Our second and third class, our sophomores and juniors, were brought back to campus this weekend. And yesterday I had a very nice conversation with a mom of an African American cadet, and she said, I was actually waiting to talk to you. I saw you and your wife walking down here, and so we had a very nice conversation. She understands what we're up against. She's read the vital signs report. She's seen the things that we've done here personally, and she feels confident that her African American son is in a good place. So that's heartwarming to know that. But I think to your point, if I went onto my Google machine right now, which I call my phone, and typed in United States Coast Guard Academy, I probably wouldn't have to search that far to get to one of these reports. And that does impact us, and it impacts our ability to attract America's best and brightest. So we're in a very challenging position where we want to recruit the most diverse cohort of students possible for service to their nation as an officer in our United States Coast Guard. But yet we know that folks read what's in social media, they read what's on the internet, and they would be concerned. And what I would say to each and every one of them, as I said to our cadets today when I addressed them, is that our job is to ensure that this is the most inclusive community possible, and that everybody who comes from that front door, the front gate of our academy, should feel like they belong here and shouldn't struggle to fit in. And it doesn't matter what your gender is, doesn't matter what your race is, your sexual orientation, you should belong here. And so we're striving to make this an institution where everyone feels like they truly belong.
Isn't it fair to say, at the end of the day, and you're not the only military in, obviously, the United States, but it's 2/3 white. You're still not that diverse. And then you look at your leadership, and I've got copies of it here. There's 12 women in there. The rest are white men.
One African American, Rear Admiral Johnson.
Yeah, one African American and one African American female, and I believe one Asian American. The minorities, in that are small. Yeah. Again, if you're looking to join an organization and say we're diverse, there's a lack of it there at the top.
Sure, and I think that's a very fair point. But then there's depth to that, right? It takes 30 years roughly to make it to the rank of flag officer. So we need to look back 30 years ago what we were doing. I graduated from this institution going on 33 years ago, and I had one African American classmate. And Mark did a great job and ended up retiring as a commander, and still friends to this day. But I had one. We just graduated the largest number of African Americans ever. We graduated the largest number of women ever. 100 women graduated with the class of 2019. I had 12. You start to compare those numbers. There is no comparison. It takes a long time to grow. But not only that, and that's back to my point is about inclusion. If we're working really hard to bring in the most diverse classes ever, you got to keep them. You got to keep them here. You got to get them to graduation. They got to meet all the requirements and make it to graduation. And then we need to retain them as a service. And this is as much about the service as it is about the Coast Guard Academy. We are one element that feeds into the system, but we have to do a better job as a service of retaining the talent that we work so hard to recruit.
General Charles Q. Brown was nominated to be the next Air Force Chief of Staff. It makes him the first African American to lead a military division in the United States. We are in the 21st century,
Yep.
and this is it. Do you find that acceptable?
I find it acceptable that he got the job.
Of course.
And he just appointed his senior enlisted person is going to be a female. First senior most enlisted member in any of the services to be female. Kudos to the Air Force. I feel very fortunate that my daughter-in-law is a officer in the Air Force. In 2 weeks, we will have the first African-American Commandant cadets, 06 in the Coast Guard, ever. Coast Guard Academy, ever. Captain Mart Ray will take over here and step into that position. We have our first African-American head football coach, ever. And there's many other firsts that I could rattle off. And I'm hesitant to do that because then that puts a lot of undue pressure on those individuals. And it's our responsibility to support them so that they can do the job that they want to do. But I think it's indicative of where we're going as a service and recognizing that, we have to celebrate the diversity we have and the talents that we have. And I think I give, again, kudos to the Air Force for what they've done.
Why do you think it's taken so long, though, Rear Admiral? Because, before you became Superintendent of the Coast Guard Academy here, you were Assistant Commandant for Human Resources in Washington. Human Resources is exactly the issue we're talking about.
Yeah. And I worked really hard there with my team to do some things to give light to those issues. I think the folks on the other end of this probably don't want to hear chapter and verse about the inner workings of Coast Guard personnel, but we had traditionally assigned in 06 to be the head of our diversity and inclusion office there, and what we got was really good officers who didn't know a lot about diversity and inclusion. And I said that we're trying to do the same things harder and not getting any better results. So we changed that position to a senior civilian member. Went out and hired an expert to come into that, and he's doing great work there in that position. Has completely changed the office and is working to change and educate the service. One of the things I also recognize is we have roughly 9 different affinity groups across the Coast Guard, probably more in different splinters. But I said, they all have. I would engage with each of them individually, and they are all talking about the same types of issues. And I said, well, can't we bring these voices together? It'd be much more powerful as one voice than many, all representing their unique constituencies. So we developed an affinity group council that brought those voices together and are now serving as a informal group to inform the head of personnel. And I took that same best practice there and brought it here because we have the same thing. We have multiple affinity groups, and they're all kind of working in their own areas but not coordinated. So we brought them together, and now I have the opportunity to meet with them on a monthly basis, and it gives me a voice in the Corps of Cadets about the issues and challenges that they're facing that I'm in a position to make a difference about. I can make positive change, and sometimes that positive change is something as subtle as ensuring that we have the right products in our exchange to support our underrepresented minorities, not just the majority males. Have the products down there, so it doesn't feel like you got to hop in an Uber and go out to Target or wherever to get the things you need to get. You can get them right here at your exchange.
Is it also though about changing the culture and the training that they get here? Because the training is tough; it has to be. Yeah. It's not an easy job. However, the training is hard on people. And I'm sure it evolves over time to take into consideration different ways of training, but it's still, to a certain degree, and this is probably going to sound a little bit over the top, it's a little bit dehumanizing. It's like your hair's all cut off. You become a sort of no one. You're built back up again. And then the selection, do you need to be selecting better when you actually select these people? Because let's face it, people don't come into the Coast Guard Academy and are turned into racists. they're already racist before they come in. It's a taught behaviour. So is it about you doing a better selection process and also maybe looking at the training?
Yeah, so I can't comment on if somebody's a racist when they come into the Coast Guard Academy or any institution across America. We all come with our backgrounds and our upbringings, but what I'm responsible for is the culture here. I can tell you that when the class of 2024 arrives on 8 July, that I've reviewed each and every one of those candidates and signed off on each and every one of those candidates to come here. And what I said to our cadets today who serve as the cadre, to your point about, it is dehumanizing to a certain degree to have many of those things stripped away from you, right? Your phone is taken away, your hair is cut off, you're put in a uniform that looks like everybody else. Some would say that might be dehumanizing, but it's something we do in the military, and militaries across the globe do. But how do we make sure that the culture is such that our cadets who are training them don't feel like it's their job to weed them out? It's not. We've already done that. We've already gone through a sifting process and a selection process to bring in 272 great young women and men who want to serve their country in the United States Coast Guard. We need to ensure that the culture is such that they feel like they belong here and that they're trained and prepared to be a cadet and then trained and prepared to be an officer. I believe if we can truly change the culture such that we're all pulling in the same direction, ensuring that we're all feeling like we belong here and all have an opportunity to succeed and meet our goals, whatever they may be, then we are going to be a much better Coast Guard Academy, and by such, we're going to be a much better Coast Guard.
My final question to you is one which probably you might have expected me to open with. So I'm just going to ask you this very bluntly.
Sure.
Is the United States Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Academy institutionally racist?
No.
Rear Admiral William Kelly, thank you for the interview.
Thank you.
On June 18th, the United States Supreme Court upheld an original executive order establishing DACA, or the DREAM Act. The act allows for children who came into the country as undocumented a pathway to legal status and citizenship. Many are fulfilling their dreams at local high schools and universities, and Julia Worth of the Connecticut Examiner spoke to me about her recent article about these dreamers. Tell us a little bit more about, why you wanted to do the story.
I thought it was important to write the story because, Eastern Connecticut State University was one of the first schools. There was just two, them and Delaware State University, that accepted Dreamers through this program, Dream.us, 4 years ago. So it's the first year, these kids are graduating college and starting to go out, into the workforce or into more school. And the DACA decision at this time allows those kids to, continue on the path they're on. Still waiting for, what else will happen, but it doesn't, set them back at this time.
Now, your story is about a young lady, Evelyn Lemus Silva, who graduated from Eastern Connecticut State University. Tell us a little bit more about her.
Yeah, so she's originally from Mexico. She moved to North Carolina around age 7 or 8. She can't quite remember how old she was, but she is the middle of 3 children and the first person in her family to go to school, go to college at all. And that's something she never really thought was going to be possible for her, because North Carolina doesn't accept students who don't have, a green card or citizenship or some other way. They don't accept DACA students into their state universities.
Another thing, of course, looking at, your article, scoring very, very well. I believe it says in there a GPA of 3.8, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, she actually won the Barnard Award from the college system in Connecticut, which is for, the highest achieving students who also, do a lot of community service. And she won that award. Has nothing to do with her being DACA. They just pick 2 or 3 students every year.
And like I said, that GPA is incredible because I did a little bit of research and understand the national average for GPA is around about 3, possibly 3.5. So she's way above the national average.
Yeah, she did very well. And she is hoping to go to medical school. She hasn't applied yet, but she told me she's planning to take the MCAT like next week or something. So I told her to get back to studying.
Absolutely, and I've seen your report that she has a research job possibly lined up at Stanford University, which of course is another one of our one of the country's amazing universities.
Yeah, she interned there last summer, and then she got offered a research assistant position for a year.
While you were researching, this article, apart from obviously speaking to Evelyn, like most journalists, you do some other research as well. What else did you find while you were actually reporting this? Because, the thing about reading these articles is they're great, but of course you can't always put everything in because there's a constraint on how many words or
Right.
whatever. So what else did you find while you were doing the research for this?
I guess I was just interested in like how many DACA students are going to college at all, and clearly it really depends on the university and the state we're in. But I put in the article that 4% of the students at Eastern are now DACA students, and that has a huge thing to do with the Dream.us program. And that was just fascinating to me because that definitely was not the case when I went to UConn. There was not, that large a percentage of students who were undocumented or had DACA status.
And I suppose really it goes to, Eastern Connecticut is a little bit different to the western part of the state in both sort of like
Yeah.
socioeconomic makeup and also it's like ethnicity makeup as well. So like you said,
Hmm.
it is an interesting statistic that times are changing, as they say.
Right. Yeah. And I think, some universities have really opened up to accepting these students into their population with different scholarships and so forth. But that really changes the population and the feel of the school.
As we said at the top of the interview, obviously the United States Supreme Court upheld the original executive order establishing DACA. It was a 5-4
Hmm.
decision. As you said as well, it's not the end of it.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of like confusion over that because it's really easy to just say like, "Oh, great decision," or if you think that's a great decision, but it is not the end. It's just saying that the reversal was not done appropriately, so it could be reversed potentially appropriately. So it is, for these students, it is okay. Take a breath. It's not happening right now, but it's not definite that they will continue having DACA as an option.
When we think about education in this country, obviously things are changing as well. We're seeing so many different things obviously happening in the country at the moment. Do you think education is going through a bit of a change as well?
I think so. Yeah, I cover a lot of education topics, and I think that right now they're all in discussion about what's important to include in education, whether it's public or private, and what students really need to have access to in schools.
Yeah, because I think I also saw another article. I think it involved Eastern as well, something to do with
Yeah,
data. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
yeah. So Eastern, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, they set up. It's a website. It's two websites actually that allows the public to access data through or that is related to coronavirus right now, but they're hoping to use it in the future for other pandemics or other illnesses of any kind, and just to make the data more accessible and understandable to the public. I think a lot of times, we just see numbers put out by the state or whoever is collecting the data, and it's not clear what it means, or it can be misinterpreted by someone. So this is a way they're hoping to help people understand what the data is really showing.
And also on a separate note, but just as important, I suppose the universities and colleges, I'm sort of hearing, and I'm sure you are as well, sort of struggling with, how do they, because of COVID-19, sort of open up in
Oh yeah.
either summer or fall, and
Yeah.
the expense that could be levied at them for doing that.
Yeah, I've been writing about that a decent amount. I know that UConn has already tallied, how many millions of dollars they'll be losing because of the closures last semester, and then the expected decline in student enrollment in the fall. I know UConn has actually not seen the decline they were expecting, but the CSCU system, which Eastern is a part of, has had a significant drop in students choosing to enroll there.
And how do they feel that ultimately could, affect them? Because, of course, they do get a certain amount of money from the state, but, of course, they are also reliant on money from other areas. So
Yeah.
are you getting a sense of how they're sort of feeling that they can financially move forward?
I think they haven't really figured it out yet. I think the state schools are feeling a little bit more confident. As you said, like they do get funding from the state. They're not going to be, going away totally. But I think private schools are facing, a tougher battle because they don't get that funding, and they're not sure that people are going to want to pay the upcharge to go to their schools right now.
Education, of course, is a very important subject. We're very grateful for you for joining us today on the podcast and explaining not only the Dreamers story, but some of those other stories that you're following as well. And we look forward to speaking to you in the future as you continue to follow these stories. And, we see where it goes in this COVID-19 world that we now live in.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me.
And you can find more stories from Julia and the entire CT Examiner team by visiting their website at ctexaminer.com. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making the headlines in the region recently. In the day this week, the Navy announced it has awarded a $9.5 billion contract to build the first 2 of 12 planned ballistic missile submarines, known as the Columbia-class program, to Electric Boat, work that will take place over the next decade. The Navy also announced that $869 million will be awarded for continued design completion, engineering work, and submarine industrial base expansion efforts. General Dynamics, EB's parent company, is investing $1.8 billion in its facilities to support the construction of the Columbia submarines, including a new 200,000 square foot building in the Groton shipyard, where the submarines will be assembled. EB plans to hire as many as 18,000 people over the next 10 years to work on the Columbia program and on the continued construction of attack submarines. The company currently has more than 16,000 employees. In the Norwich Bulletin, the University of Connecticut decided to eliminate 4 athletic teams as it deals with an expected budget deficit driven by issues related to the coronavirus pandemic. UConn President Thomas Katsoulis told the school's Board of Trustees that the school will reduce the number of sports it supports from 22 to 18, eliminating its men's cross-country, men's swimming and driving, men's tennis and women's rowing teams. The move came as the Board of Trustees approved a $1.5 billion spending plan for its main campus in Storrs and regional campuses, with the expectation that it will need to revisit budgets several times this year to deal with coronavirus-related shortfalls. The school's chief financial officer has predicted a deficit of between $47 to $129 million, depending on when and how the school reopens from the pandemic, and whether it will face cuts in support from the legislature, which is dealing with coronavirus-related shortfalls to the state budget. And in the Chronicle this week, following budget cuts totaling about $150,000 from the Windham Board of Finance, town staff and Windham Town Council have approved even more cuts. Those budget cuts will come from town services in an attempt to balance the 2020-2021 budget. Windham Town Manager Jim Rivers presented the cuts to the council recently. The cuts were required because in late May, the Windham Board of Finance approved the town's general government budget and a 1.3% increase over the current year's budget. The approved budget is about $155,000 under what town staff initially requested from the Finance Board. In addition, Rivers said the town needed to decrease expenses by about $40,000 because of increasing trash collection tipping fees. And summer has arrived, bringing with it the state's first heat wave. Last Saturday marked the official first day of summer, and by Tuesday, the 4th day of 90-degree-plus weather as recorded at Bradley International Airport at Windsor Locks. Is it going to be a scorcher this year? That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East, where you can listen to the show again on demand. And please like, follow and share on our social media platforms too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thanks for listening.